For the past couple of centuries, we've seen great economic and political turmoil all across the world. Europe, the Middle East, and Asia have all been facing great challenges that often don't have clear solutions. And these challenges often affect many, many parts of the world. However, we often don't hear enough about what is going on in our poor southern neighbors. This is because for the past couple of decades, Latin America has been in a state of near political and economic anarchy. To give you some statistics that illustrate this point, we have that the murder rates all across the nation are extremely high. 17 out of the top 20 countries with the highest murder rates in the entire world are in Latin America. The highest in the world, which is Honduras, has a murder rate of 1 out of every 1,000 people dying by homicide every single year. If we were to apply that statistic to the Cary-Morrisville area, that would mean that we'd be facing 176 murders every single year. On top of that, drug cartels run rampant throughout the region and make an annual income of $330 billion. That's more than the income of the government of India. On top of that, corruption rankings are high all across the region. To give you an example, out of 176 countries, Latin American countries consistently ranked the lowest for corruption. Guatemala ranked at 136, Venezuela at 166, and Haiti at 154. On top of that, 1 out of every 5 Latin Americans live in poverty. And for some countries, like Venezuela, that number is more like 80%. So you might wonder, why is it that we're seeing such poor statistics all across the board? Why is the region suffering so greatly? And of course, we can't do this justice in a 15-minute video, but we're going to try. I think that the major factors affecting the lack of development and poverty in Latin America are 1, the drug trade, 2, a lack of modern economic development, and 3, political corruption. So, to really understand the drug trade, you have to understand where it all started with Pablo Escobar. He was originally a poor smuggler who moved televisions, computers illegally from Bolivia to Colombia. However, he soon noticed that a gram of cocaine was worth almost 10 times as much in the United States as it was in Colombia. So he created an entire organization called the Medellin Cartel, dedicated to producing cocaine in Colombia and shipping it to the US. And with this, he grew extremely wealthy and powerful. It's been calculated that every single week he made $420 million. He spent $2,000 every month just buying rubber bands to hold all his money, and he supplied 80% of the world's cocaine. With this large amount of power and influence, he was able to corrupt government officials at the highest levels. And because of this, the president of Colombia and even the high-ranking executive members were often either on his payroll or scared of him. There's the same situation as imagining if the United States government was afraid of a terrorist like Osama bin Laden and didn't want to act in certain ways or do certain things to them in fear of what might happen, in fear of the reprisals. The Colombian government was essentially afraid, scared out of its mind, of a common street thug. And the way he was able to do this, the way he was able to amass so much influence and so much power, was through a tactic called plata o plomo, silver or lead. That means that Pablo would come up to government officials and say, either you take my money, you take my silver, and do whatever I want, or within a week, you'll take my lead, and every single member of your family will be dead by then. And of course, many, many officials did whatever he wanted because of this, out of fear. And when the United States tried to go into Colombia and clean up the region, bring Pablo Escobar to justice, we fought an uphill battle and often had to deal with this government corruption and with this influence he amassed. And it was a very expensive, very costly process in both lives and money. And once we were finally able to work with the Colombian government to bring Pablo to justice, a similar organization called the Cali Cartel arose in his place and did the exact same thing Pablo did, which led to another uphill battle when the United States tried to bring them to justice. And after many decades of working very closely with the Colombian government, we're finally able to more or less clean up the country and get it in a somewhat decent shape. However, After that, the drug trade only moved to Mexico, where we currently see the Sinaloa cartel, which is considered by the CIA as the world's most powerful drug cartel in the current era. And this cartel is doing, again, the exact same thing Pablo and the Cali cartel did years ago. And we are again fighting an uphill battle trying to bring them to justice. They've been able to corrupt government officials at some of the highest levels. There have even been reports that they've gotten to American FBI agents. There's been stories of FBI agents allowing licensed gun dealers to sell weapons illegally to the Sinaloa cartel. On top of that, they've been able to gain massive amounts of influence in the governments of most Central American countries. For example, for the past couple of decades, almost every single president of the country of Guatemala has either been directly affiliated with or somehow linked to the cartel. That means that a drug lord was a president of a country. And as you can imagine, this has led to widespread violence all across the region. It's led to these enormous, ridiculous murder rates, and it's slowed down development immeasurably. Besides this, we also have economics as a contributing factor to Latin American poverty. We've seen economic development and economic growth across the region, but it's often not kept up pace with population growth and is often not distributed to the majority of the population. Part of the problem is that most Latin American economies are based on agriculture rather than industry like most Western economies are. This is a problem because agricultural economies and agriculture generally does not create as much job growth as industry does. So if you think about it this way, to have a factory in a region producing something, you need somebody to go and extract the raw resources. You need them to then manufacture them and process them, ship them to where they have to go. And you, of course, need to have a team of engineers and mechanics working all around the clock, giving maintenance to the factory or designing new parts of the machinery. With agriculture, you don't see this massive amount of job creation, which leads to poverty. And part of the problem is that elites in these countries are generally not interested in industrializing the nation. They're not interested as much in economic development and economic growth as they are in maintaining their own power. And we see that a large problem is that they often don't allow there to be competition. They don't allow there to be a free market in many of these countries. They often get together with their government buddies and give them a huge bribe in exchange for being granted a near monopoly in these countries. And because of this, because of the great crime, foreign corporations often are not very interested in investing in Latin America. This is because of the great risk that any Latin American investment comes with it. Now, you don't want to put a factory in a country where your employees might get murdered, kidnapped, or robbed by the cartels, and you don't want to put a factory in a place where you might get barred from the country, or your factory might be stolen, or a monopoly might be granted to one of your rivals by a corrupt government official. And since there's no outside investment, and since elites aren't interested in industrialization, you see a stagnation of economic development. Additionally, most businesses in Latin America, with a few notable exceptions, are family-based. There is really no such thing as a modern corporation in Latin America. There's no such thing as a modern financial structure. And even though here in the United States, corporations often get a bad rap, they're incredibly important to any developing economy. This is because of the large amount of capital that they can provide to any investment. So let's imagine that you own a family business and you want to place banana plantations, and you start off with $100,000 in capital. Each banana plantation costs, say, $1,000. That means that you can create 100 plantations, and after that, you're done. You can't create any more jobs, you can't grow your business anymore until you get some more outside revenue. However, if you were to turn your family business into a corporation and sell off some stock and allow foreign investors to come in and put money into your business, then you might start off with $1 million or 10 million or 100 million. and you'd be able to grow your business that much faster. Since we don't see this in Latin America, since we don't see a modern stock market in most of these countries, economic growth is severely stagnated. Finally, the third major problem affecting the region is government corruption. For the most part, you see that the leaders of these countries are often populists who won the election by making huge promises and creating so-called social programs, welfare and whatnot, to supposedly help the poor. However, these welfare programs often serve more as embezzlement schemes than as actual social programs. To give you a quote to illustrate this, Eva Perón, who was the wife of Argentinian dictator Juan Perón, who was really credited as the inventor, or she is the developer of the modern Latin American socialist state, once said this: "Keeping books on social progress is capitalistic nonsense. I just take the money to the poor and give it to them. I don't have time to keep records." And the problem of this is that records are essential for any government operation. How can you make sure that the money is going where it's supposed to go and the people are actually being helped out if you don't have any records? And it's true, most of these countries don't keep extensive records, so there's no way to verify where tax dollars are going. And quite often, what politicians will do is they'll take tax dollars, transfer them into their bank account, and while the people are out dying and starving in the streets, they'll go to Miami, buy a nice apartment, and hire hookers. And that's where tax dollars are going, instead of helping the poor, instead of leading to economic development. And you might ask, why is it that this is allowed to happen? Why do the people allow politicians to do this? Why do they let them get away with this? And the problem is that in Latin America, you often don't see a developed political culture like we have here in the United States. Here in the US, we place great value on ideals such as liberty, democracy, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and we make sure to hold politicians accountable if they ever try to violate many of these ideals. We hold them accountable and we make sure that they are punished severely if they ever try and engage in the embezzlement that happens in Latin America. However, in these regions, people are often very gullible and they will sell their vote to whoever can make the nicest promises, even though they know that there's no way that those promises can ever be fulfilled or will ever be fulfilled. Additionally, they'll sell their vote to whomever gives them the most trinkets. By that I mean is politicians often go around villages and distribute small bags of food or building materials and don't think that these things actually help the poor. No, they're just a small measly bag of rice, or it might be a couple pieces of torn metals that somebody can build a shack. And this causes people to sell their vote to essentially the highest bidder, allowing politicians with the largest amount of capital to win elections, not necessarily the person who's right for the country to win the election. And of course, once these people are in power, they start making these government programs and they take the funds for themselves. And people don't stop them because they don't believe that the system can be fixed. They believe that it's corrupt beyond measure and all they should do is take the trinket and go, because there's no way that they can ever make this better. And if Latin America ever is to change, if there ever is to be a reduction in government corruption, this political culture has to change. There has to be a developed political culture that places value on many of the things that we see Western democracies place value. Things like liberty, things like freedom of religion, things like trial by jury, which often does not happen in these countries. And another factor contributing to this political corruption is that the justice system in these nations is often as corrupt as the executive or the legislative branch ever is. Justices and judges are often not interested in prosecuting politicians or anybody who breaks the law in general. For example, Guatemala's most recent Supreme Court has had many scandals because there's been a justice who's been involved in an embezzlement scheme. There's another who was involved in the human trafficking of children, and yet another was involved in the drug trade. So of course, they don't care about enforcing the laws. They don't care about bringing people to justice and making sure that politicians actually respect the Constitution and the body of laws of the country. this lax enforcement of the law only causes people in general, but politicians especially, to break the law all the more. And you might wonder, why does this matter? Why do we care about Latin America? I think first and foremost, we have a human obligation to the region. It has a vast number of natural resources and a huge workforce, and it can prosper if we just help it to do so. If we just clean up corruption, if we reduce drugs and violence, then help it develop economically, then we can see millions and millions of people lifted out of poverty. Additionally, transferring our main manufacturing base away from China and to Latin America will make us more independent, and it'll allow the American government to be better prepared to respond to any threats that China may pose in the future, any conflicts that might arise in the future. The American government will have less ties to China, so we'll be better able to react independently. On top of that, solving the drug problem in Latin America will help alleviate the drug epidemic that is occurring here in the United States. If there's no cocaine, if there's no heroin coming in from Latin America, then it's a lot harder for it to come into the United States. On top of that, no matter what side you are on immigration, by developing these countries and by helping them prosper, we'll reduce the amount of illegal immigrants to the United States. That's because if people don't feel the need to leave their homes and to leave their families because of poverty, because of crime, because of political oppression, then they won't feel the need to come to the United States. And then we'll have that problem greatly alleviated here in America. And of course, this won't be an easy battle. We'll have to work closely with Latin American governments, and we'll have to get them cleaned up. We'll have to reduce political corruption and develop that political culture through massive education programs. Additionally, we'll have to fight cartels and bring drug lords to justice. And we'll have to help get investment and industrialization into the region. We'll have to help it develop modern financial structures. However, if we can do this, I think that the United States, Latin America, and frankly, the world will be all the better off because of it.